The Athletic.
The race is on, and Lando Norris signed off for 2024 with victory in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to seal the Constructors' Championship for McLaren. But was he ever under any real threat? And why couldn't Ferrari mount a stronger challenge? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to look back at the final race of the season are Mark Hughes, Samarth Kanal and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Mark, we made it. The end of the season. Thought we'd never get here.
Yeah, it's been a very long one. Very enjoyable one, though. And it's the way time passes is a bit odd in the middle of a season, isn't it?
It's simultaneously rapid and very slow, isn't it, Scott?
It is, yeah. It doesn't feel like that long ago. We were in testing in Bahrain in the season opener and making jokes at Mark's expense for how he would manage to spin out 24 entertaining race analyses on a season that was inevitably going to be dominated by Max Verstappen and Red Bull. Yeah. How wrong we were. I mean,
now you look foolish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, do you know what? This is a rare occasion where I'm happy to have that egg on my face because of what a season it's ended up turning into. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's ended up going so quickly, because race by race it got more entertaining. And then we actually had some championship interests to look into. By the time we got to Abu Dhabi, the final weekend's just absolutely flown by.
Yeah, and it's nice to all be in the same place as well, because there's always a mix and match of us on the ground, but we don't actually often have 4 people in the same room.
And it's a good audition, isn't it? A dress rehearsal for the live show or the live shows, I should say, in January when we take this podcast on tour.
What's this?
Now, we've been advertising you. You can't trick people like that.
Oh, okay. When is it?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm very pleased you asked, because just by chance, I can tell you exactly when it is. Put this in your diary. Mm-hmm. Conway Hall in London on Thursday, January the 16th.
Okay.
And the Old Rep Theatre in Birmingham on January the 17th.
Oh, the next day, the very next day.
Exactly, yeah, double header.
Okay.
I know I'm attending, but what if I wanted to buy tickets, Ed? How much would they cost me and where would I go?
Well, the tickets are £25, and if you wanted to go and buy them, click the link in the description or head to podlifeevents.com and search for the Race F1 podcast. It's that simple. We're very much looking forward to it. We have had a few chats this weekend about some of the ideas of what we're going to do in the podcast, but it's gradually taking shape. But I can tell you, Scott will be there, I will be there, Mark will be there.
What time does it start?
Well, that's actually a good question. I'm not sure exactly what time it starts. You've actually stumped me there. That information will be on there. It is an evening thing. I can tell you that. Okay. And what an evening it will be. It will be an absolute classic. But yeah,
the best stories will be told in a bar afterwards, I am sure.
As is always the way.
But we promise not to go too crazy so that the good folks that come to see us in Birmingham don't suffer for us getting carried away with the quality of the stories on the Thursday night in London.
Absolutely. We'll make sure we're on top podcasting form both of those days. And actually, we should add that these are exclusive live events. They're not going to be released anywhere. So if you're in the room, you hear it. If you're not, then you will not. We'd be really, really happy to see you there. And if you want to perhaps buy it as a gift for Christmas to someone who's a fan of the Race F1 podcast, imagine getting that on Christmas Day. What could be better?
Or even if they don't like us, get it for your enemies as well.
That's a very, very good idea. Yeah, I like that. Samarth, let's come to you now, because you're going to be at the live show, I suspect, but not necessarily on stage.
Is that what you're getting me for Christmas? Because I need some socks, to be honest. I'm not saying that this is a bad gift, but
we'll get you some socks.
After 2 weeks in Abu Dhabi, yeah.
I've been on good sock buying form because my luggage was late, so I had to go and buy some emergency socks.
What was the original question?
No one knows. No one knows. I'm talking about socks now. But
hi, Samarth. How's your first year in F1 been?
It's been brilliant.
With us, anyway. First year in F1 with us.
Absolutely brilliant. I just think even at the lowest points of this job and this role, it has been better than anything. Any job I've had in the past, and it's just been absolutely wonderful to be here. I just feel so lucky. Not enough socks though.
Well, that's always a problem when travelling to cover F1. But yeah, after that positive feedback, you can come back next year. Right, Mark, remember the live show. Have you written that down?
16th and 17th of January, somewhere in London, blah, blah, somewhere in Birmingham.
That's the basic gist of it. All the information's there. We're looking forward to it, and we will make absolutely sure that Mark is there as well. Right, let's talk about the race now. Relatively straightforward, Mark, but can you explain how the McLaren versus Ferrari battle played out, please?
Yes, I mean, it was stacked in McLaren's favour as we came into the weekend, obviously, 21 points. But it wasn't impossible for Ferrari to turn that around. It wouldn't take very much. Just a little incident or unfortunately timed safety car for one or the other. But as it turned out, the odds were stacked further in McLaren's favour when Ferrari had to replace Charles Leclerc's battery. And he then lost his Q2 lap time as well. So the combined effect of that had him starting on the last row, and the McLarens had locked out the front row. So it was difficult to see how they would lose it from there. But it became slightly trickier in the opening few seconds of the race when Max Verstappen made contact with Oscar Piastri and spun them both to the back. So Lando no longer had his rear gunner to keep Carlos Sainz off his back. Carlos was in really good form. He was keeping the pressure on, but the Ferrari just wasn't quite as quick as the McLaren around here. It was a little bit quick at the end of the straights, but he never got close enough to make that count. He couldn't, because the McLaren was just better over the lap. It was carrying a bit more downforce. It was super quick through turn 9, which is the entry into the last sector, and gives you a good run at that last sector, which really helps the lap time. And it was a grippier, better balanced car than the Ferrari. That was just enough to allow Lando to do his stuff, which was all that was required in the end.
It was added insult to injury when Verstappen and Piastri collided, and Verstappen did a beautiful pirouette and carried on going, while Piastri found himself just facing the wrong way in the runoff and having to boot it back round and get going. So you knew that one McLaren was out of the picture, which I think, considering how the weekend had gone up to that point with the performance of the McLaren and what, as Mark pointed out, that grid penalty for Leclerc, plus that initial points advantage, it just looked like it was going so serenely. The Piastri spin just injected that sort of first little bit of nervousness, and then a combination of that first corner and then obviously the melee in the middle of the lap. All of a sudden, Charles Leclerc emerges from the first lap in I think it was eighth in 8th place
from 19th.
Yeah, and I think it might be the first justified woo that we've heard from a driver over a radio. Leclerc was absolutely right to react in that way, which made me feel a bit stupid, because I think you said on the Saturday, Ed, that Leclerc could quite easily find himself well inside the top 10 on the first lap, and then all of a sudden the picture looks quite different. And I thought, I don't know, from that far back, how on earth do you find yourself not in Abu Dhabi? It's not not the most chaotic race that we see, and also just not really conducive to, there's a short run to turn 1, there's not much opportunity to make ground. But it was the perfect start for Ferrari. One of the McLarens out the picture, the second Ferrari well inside the top 10. If there was going to be any nervousness for McLaren, that first lap set it in motion. But Norris was just supreme. There wasn't any last gasp reliability problems. And I think McLaren probably ends the season as the only team that didn't really have one, which is one of the reasons why it's won the championship.
Yeah, they've been very, very consistent in terms of banking the points. And it will have been nervous because of what happened with Piastri, and he hit the back of Colapinto as well, got a penalty for that. So Piastri ultimately only came back to 10th. So there's always that frisson of excitement of, if Norris, something goes wrong, or there's a failure, or a back marker drives into him, all of these things can happen. So I don't know about you, Samarth, but it just added that little bit of, this could change, because Ferrari, they didn't have as quick a car, but they maximised the race, coming through to second and third. So actually, I would say, even though Ferrari lost the Constructors' Championship, they did a great job in that race just to put themselves in that position where McLaren couldn't rest easy until Norris crossed the line.
Yeah, absolutely. They kept the pressure on, and throughout the race there was an element of suspense, which was very welcome, to be honest. In the last race of the season, I was concerned that we'd get here with Max Verstappen having swept the Drivers' Championship and Red Bull having swept the Constructors, and at the start of the season, not 3 weeks ago. And it was a big relief, and it was good to see Ferrari keep the pressure on. Actually, we should be very happy with that result, right?
They should, yeah. And actually, Fred Vasseur after the race was quite sanguine about the whole thing, because he was happy with the season they've put together. Fred Vasseur's experienced enough to know that, let's say Norris had suffered an engine failure and they'd have won the Constructors' Championship. That wouldn't fundamentally change what they'd done this season. And he's very much, let's focus on what we've done, the progress we've made. That's not saying that they're making excuses for not winning it, but saying that we've made steps in all areas. we can still do better, but we are considering this to be a good positive season.
I think if Ferrari had snuck it, it wouldn't have been undeserved, but they kind of found themselves in the championship fight a little bit by accident because of obviously Red Bull being removed from the situation because of the downturn that they suffered, and also just Ferrari going missing for chunks of the season. It wasn't a campaign that was. Whereas McLaren's season was built on being basically strong-ish at the start, but then consistently strong from once the first quarter had ended. If anything, they should have been further ahead, but there were lots of drop points along the way. So I think that probably helps take the sting out of it a little bit as far as Vasseur and Ferrari are concerned, because you have that element of knowing, well, we came really close and we gave it a damn good go in that final race, but we probably really shouldn't have been in the picture. And as much as it stings to have got that close to ending the title drought, realistically, I think they'll look at it and go, actually, to have got that close, we've ended up putting together a great season.
Yeah, just to tack onto that as well, because 2025 is a continuation of what's happening this year in terms of development. Ferrari should be buoyed by the fact that they kind of overcame their development struggles really well. They can just carry that on into next year. So, I'll stick my flag down and say that they're front runners next year. That's it. I mean, having developed so well this year, they've got something to be really proud of. Very positive.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. But Scott, obviously McLaren, they last won an F1 title back in 2008. That was Lewis Hamilton's first driver's title. The last Constructors' Championship was way back in 1998. So how significant an achievement, how big an achievement is this for McLaren?
Very big. Multiple reasons why. First, toppled Red Bull, which, as I said at the start of this, nobody would have predicted at the start of the year with where the first few races went. That alone is significant. Second is ending its own drought, going back a long way, driver's side, even longer on the constructor's side. There is obviously a little bit of an asterisk in that they were constructors champions, weren't they, between 1998 and now. It just got erased from history, the disqualification from the 2007 season. And the third factor is that it's an unusual achievement in the turbo hybrid era. First engine customer to win a championship in this engine era. First real customer since Brawn in 2009, because obviously Red Bull de facto Renault Works team for their runner titles.
To be precise, they were paying for their engines in a customer team in 2010. Then they got the Infinity thing, and they were the de facto Works thing. But we tend to sort of bundle that all together. And I'd agree, the Brawn year in 2009 was kind of the last one that was sort of unequivocally a customer one. It's a very boring and precise definition, but I thought it was worth clarifying.
Yeah, so it's something that ticks a lot of boxes for McLaren as a team, but also F1 as well in terms of being a good achievement. It also completes a bit of a recovery from not just the last couple of years, obviously starting 2023 being last in the championship, but if you go back earlier to this race in 2020, remember when they sealed third in the Constructors' Championship that year, and that was also the weekend they announced the investment from MSP Sports Capital. I think I got that right. That was actually the moment where the what we now know as McLaren Racing right now was secured in the form that allowed it to go on and become successful. And it wasn't obviously a straight trajectory from there, because they had the dip across late 21 through 22 and then had to recover. But this would not have been possible without where the team had got to 4 years ago, because they kept it secret at the time, but a proper fight for survival financially, and it ended up requiring significant moves to be made to secure that, from the sale and lease back of the factory to extra investment from the shareholders, and then eventually selling a stake in McLaren Racing itself. Without that, McLaren wouldn't have been. They'd have been saved one way or another, and they weren't facing like a slow death, but they were at risk of becoming the new Williams through the 2010s. And the fact that they have just dramatically escaped that narrative and become a championship winning team again is testament to the massive effort that's gone on to turn it around. Because it was only 6 years ago that Eric Boullier, at the time racing director of McLaren, said you can't win a championship without a works engine, and that's exactly what they've gone on to do.
I don't know about you, Mark, but we've both been here covering F1 during that drop-off. And this, what you might call the third coming of McLaren. Yeah. You had the first coming, originally started by Bruce McLaren, then the Teddy Meyer era. then the Ron Dennis era, which elided into the Mercedes era, if you like, and now this is the third coming. There's no foregone conclusion this would happen.
Oh, absolutely not. No, as Scott said, it was very perilous at one stage, and the Ron Dennis era had come to an end, and what the future held after that was not at all clear, and it just shows how long the competitive cycles are if you fall behind. I suppose the last truly competitive season, even though they didn't win the constructors title, was 2012 when at least they were fighting for it, but it's taken that long to come back into championship contention. And if you think from the last time they won a constructors championship before this, it was 12 years later when Red Bull won its first Constructors' Championship. It's gone on to win 6 since then. So it's just amazing how long it can take a project to stop and start and go through all the inevitable upheavals. It's never a straightforward run.
Yeah, and it's a tip of the hat, I think, to not just everyone. There's a lot of very good people at McLaren. Obviously, you can't name them all, but at the top,
give it a go.
That could be an interesting podcast.
Not with that
nice
attitude.
because these teams really are, everybody makes a contribution, and it tends to get boiled down to a few key players. But I'm going to mention key players here now. But Zach Brown, there was a point where I was wondering whether Zach Brown era might go a little bit awry, but he got to a point where he realised changes had to be made. He did it. Andrea Stella has been fantastic as team principal. A huge amount of respect for what he's done. I think also Andreas Seidel and his spell as team principal played a part as well. Things like the Mercedes engine deal and some of the infrastructure projects he was integral to. So, yeah, it's a reward for a lot of that progress they've made.
One extra name I would throw in, which I think is sort of an offshoot of what Stella has done as team principal, is Peter Prodromou, who I think has been unleashed in the Stella era. This kind of feels now like what McLaren thought they were getting a decade ago, when that was obviously a massive deal, that move when he went from Red Bull. And then it's just kind of ended up being it's not that you forget he's there, because obviously he would have played an important role, but I definitely think the shackles came off when Stella rejigged the technical organisation. I think the best way to summarise it from conversations with people like Andrea and Zach is that Prodromou kind of went from managing to designing again.
He's a creative, and they let him be creative.
Exactly. And then obviously additional people like Rob Marshall coming in, and again, just really good leadership in the early tweak of his job. Yeah. When he joined in as engineering director, started, and then Stella saw that creative prowess and just went, no, you need to be designing stuff. So they made him chief designer within 3 months, I think it was. That was part of obviously David Sanchez went there and then was removed. You have to say that the way that's been installed as a technical structure, but then evolved really quickly to bring out the best of people like Marshall and Prodromou, is, I think, is testament to Stella's leadership. It's worth shouting out these people. Obviously, they do, as Ed said, they run big teams, and there are a lot of other people in there doing a huge amount of important work. But these sort of totems of the technical organisation are totems for a reason.
And just 14 points separating McLaren and Ferrari in the end. So that was a really close battle right down to the wire.
Hi, it's Samantha Shea from Wirecutter, the product recommendation service from the New York Times. We all know those people who are simply impossible to shop for. At Wirecutter, we have a huge collection of gift guides to help you find the perfect present. We can help you find a gift for the indoorsy type, a gift for the coffee lover looking to try a new bean, something that's nice but not too nice for the new person you're seeing, the best packing cubes for frequent travelers, for the music-loving dad, try a Thelonious Monk album. We believe there's a perfect gift for everyone, and Wirecutter can help you find it. Check out all our gift guides at nytimes.com/gift guides.
Right, we'll get back to the race in a moment, but first a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, the Formula One Heineken Dutch Grand Prix. Now, Mark, you've been at all of the F1 races there since it returned to the calendar. What makes that race so special to you?
It's a real fun, old-school Grand Prix, an old-school circuit. Even though it's been modified since its 70s and 80s heyday, it's been shortened, but it's been done in a way that makes the racing fantastic. And the whole atmosphere of the place, it's the sort of clubby vibe it has, the excitement of the fans on Verstappen's home ground. It's just a fantastic fun place to be around, to be part of that weekend. Just such a great venue and a great event.
That's the thing, not only have you got the great racing, great track, you've got fantastic stuff going on. The fans always seem to be having a brilliant time there. There's places with loud music, more relaxed places. Well, absolutely everything is there. And although you're right by the beach, you're also really close to Amsterdam. People will be amazed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a short train ride from Amsterdam. About 20, 25 minutes, I'd say.
Yeah, great transport links, train, cycling, even really close to Schiphol Airport as well, so a major European hub. And if you'd like to register your interest in attending the 2025 Dutch Grand Prix today, which I can absolutely recommend, you can click the link in the description. Right, Samarth, let's get to one of the big talking points. We've mentioned this, but we haven't drilled down into it. Max Verstappen's attempt to pass Piastri for second at turn 2. That obviously got him a 10-second penalty. Obviously, lots of questions to the members club, both Urban Strenchen and Paul Balkazak asked about his penalty in terms of if it was the right decision and why it wasn't just a racing incident. What do you think?
It wasn't a racing incident. Max Verstappen basically clattered into him. He wasn't alongside. I don't think there was a realistic chance of him making it in front of Piastri at that corner. So it seemed an easy decision for the stewards to make, and they did make it pretty quickly. Max Verstappen was not happy, though. He made that, why not make it a 20-second, I'm just paraphrasing there, but why not make it a 20-second penalty then? Which I found really funny, because it's almost like you've copped the penalty, damage has been done, and now you're risking adding fuel to the already raging fire between the drivers and the FIA by questioning their decisions. I mean, I honestly find that funny, because I love his dry sense of humor and his tendency to needle as much as possible. I get it as well. Drivers think it's over-policed and stuff, but by the letter of the law, it's a penalty.
Is that lashing out in adversity, as George put it?
Yeah, well, there we go. And he didn't swear, though. He's got his community service to do, isn't he? So he's being careful.
What I really enjoyed about this was Oscar Piastri's message over the radio. What was it? Yeah, move of world champion, something like that.
Yeah.
He's great over the radio, Piastri.
Yes, he is. He's, you don't hear a lot from him, but it's pretty cutting when you do.
Yeah, he's economical with his words in engineering, in feedback, and in criticism and mockery of other drivers, it seems. So I think I spoke to Verstappen afterwards, and you could tell that he was... You could tell that it's at the end of the season, because I think he's a bit less... he was a bit less cutting about things than he might have been, but he still pointed out, he had a big smile on his face when he said, could have been 20 seconds, 30 seconds, drive through, stop, go. I was waiting to see what they'd give me. So he couldn't help himself. And I had like a little bit of sympathy for him, in that we know now this year that the 5-second penalty as standard got replaced with 10 seconds. So if you cop a penalty, you cop a penalty. The one exception we've had was the Norris one in Austin, and that was basically because, well, Max did this, so we're going to do that. So mitigation. When you've got, we went over this in detail, didn't we, in the podcast that we recorded last week? But the way that it works, unfortunately, with the stewards is there are some prescribed penalties that they can't get away with applying. So you had this move at the first corner where, like, the move's on enough for Verstappen to try it, doesn't nail it properly, does his best to get out of it. He's trying to avoid hitting Piastri, let alone overtaking by the time they actually collide. And it's the most unfortunate bit of contact. I would wager that he had to hit the McLaren at exactly that angle, in exactly that moment through the corner, for them both to spin the way that they did. It was like when they're right on the edge of it, and the weight transfer and the balance of the car is where it is. It felt a little bit like a penalty that was applied slightly because of the consequence rather than the actual incident that took place. But I think I've said this before on this podcast, I'm kind of okay with that, in that my position on that has changed over time, because it did ruin Piastri's race. And it had a not insignificant impact on Verstappen, but nowhere near as bad as Piastri's. So back in the day, 5 seconds for that probably would have felt all right. 10 seconds felt a little bit harsh, but you can see why it's been given.
Yeah, exactly. By the guidelines. I mean, a legitimate move. It wasn't a lunatic move to have launched or anything. So, these things do happen. Of course, Verstappen came through to 6th and Oscar Piastri came through to 10th place, which, of course, wouldn't have been enough to seal the championship for McLaren had Norris hit significant trouble. Right, Mark. Wasn't a great final last Mercedes weekend for Lewis Hamilton on track, although he did come through to finish 4th. So how did he do that, given his lowly starting position?
He was actually in good competitive shape all weekend. He was quick. He was quicker than Russell throughout. He's probably the next quickest car after the McLarens through the Friday. He was well on course to easily breeze through Q1 when the bollard got thrown at his car, and so that's what put him down there. From there, it made sense to do an offset tyre strategy, and the only one that started on the hards while everyone's on the mediums. The medium was much better tyre, and with that offset strategy, I mean, he ran along on the hard, just getting past the slow cars, and that meant he was on the faster tyre when everybody was on the slow one in the last sort of 24 laps or so. And he was regularly the fastest car on track. He rejoined 17 seconds behind Russell and overtook him on the last lap to take that 4th place. So really terrific race for him. But it wasn't as patchy as the contrast between his qualifying position and his race finishing position made it look. He was genuinely on the pace this weekend throughout.
I thought that was actually a much more convincing weekend, qualifying result being the exception, than the result from Las Vegas was important. Because if you remember, Fred Vasseur was asked in Qatar when Lewis had said on the Saturday in Qatar, "Oh, I'm not fast anymore," and Fred was asked if he's worried about that, and Fred said, "No, look at the race that he ran in Vegas." I would say this weekend is more significant than what we saw in Vegas because, as Mark said, he was quick from start to finish. Qualifying was completely out of his hands, and in the race it was just he ticked every box. I think I said this actually when the race started or was about to start. There was a chance he would go backwards before he got to go forwards because he was starting on the hards, and even though he only lined up, he was at 16th after penalties for the others. I genuinely thought he could be like 17th maybe coming out of turn 1, but he actually got a good start, gained positions into turn 1, picked off a couple of cars opportunistically around that sort of first lap trouble. And then just did, I think, kind of the quintessential Hamilton recovery drive, which we saw so many times when there were setbacks through the title winning years. But he just works his way through the field one by one by one. And actually, with the way that the race played out without, massive significant intervention, I actually think, ironically, the setup, despite him being on his own on that strategy, I think that ends up being the optimal strategy when there isn't that like full safety car in the race. And I think we'd actually seen that in the F2 feature race earlier in the day. I think the faster race was start on the harder tyre and then switch to the faster tyre in the end.
If we'd had a VSC, which looked possible for the debris from the Bottas-Magnussen collision, he hadn't yet made his pit stop. If he'd been able to make it at the 10-second saving, he would have been in real contention. He would, definitely podium, maybe more.
Yeah, it's one of those great ones that wasn't a brilliant result on paper, but actually sort of a fitting weekend. Really good performance. That's really what you want to see. And I think you could see Hamilton was quite relieved for this spell to be over, not because of the Mercedes spell not being great, because it has been, but just because he's ready to move on to new things. It hasn't ended so well. But Toto Wolff said after the race that, in speaking to Hamilton, like Lewis had said, well, the way the last few races haven't been great, but the story is of the 12 seasons, and what a story that's been. So that's why it was good for a good farewell after a very, very long time at Mercedes. Now, Samarth. The lower points positions were quite storied as well. It was the battle for 6th in the championship between Alpine, Haas and RB. Pierre Gasly's 7th place ahead of Nico Hülkenberg and Fernando Alonso sealed that. How big a missed opportunity do you think this was for Haas, though?
Yeah, I do think it was a pretty big missed opportunity because, firstly, it all started in qualifying where Hülkenberg shot us all with, I want to say P4. And then he passed cars in that tunnel, the pit exit, and got a 3-place grid penalty, sending him spiralling back down to 7th, whereas Pierre Gasly picked up 5th on the grid then. So firstly, missed opportunity there. And then Kevin Magnussen avoiding a fast-moving Mercedes behind, collecting a bollard and damaging his floor in the process because he went off track. So Kevin Magnussen could have qualified better than 14th. And then that kind of led to the race today where I think they found themselves in trouble partly because of that. I also think Kevin Magnussen had a slow pit stop. His first pit stop didn't help. Then he found himself in trouble because of that slow pit stop. He didn't have the clear air in front of him, and he got punted out of the race not punted out of the race, but hit by Bottas. So, definitely a missed opportunity there. And I think it had a chance to beat Alpine, actually. Although, fair play to Pierre Gasly, who's just put in some really good performances.
Yeah, I did say to Komatsu, the team principal, after the race, do you take quite a lot from the fact that, but for that one outrageous weekend at Interlagos when Alpine bagged 35 points, you were the 6th best team, ultimately. That's how they've got to look at it, hasn't it, Scott? Yeah, absolutely. I haven't done a full account of the points from this year, but I will. I have a sneaking suspicion that if I know it was never going to happen for this year, but if that rule change to do points for just the top 12, not even beyond that, was in effect this year, I'm pretty sure Haas would have got it over the line. But I need to double check because Gasly's form and Alpine's form picked up so much in the second half of the season onwards, especially from Austin, that even outside of those big points hauls, they might have got a little bit more. So Hülkenberg seemed to be the master of finishing sort of 11th or 12th for much of the first half of the season. And I've said this before, I do think that would better reflect a season like this, but it would depend on exactly how you adjusted the kind of points distribution. At a glance, it looks like it's about 15th P11 and P12s that Haas managed over the seasons. That would have made a big difference. RB were never really, they were already quite a long way behind, but the RBs were okay this weekend, but they weren't super quick. So, it was it was a really, really interesting battle. But Pierre Gasly's just had a great final part of the season. He's been pretty good all season, to be honest. He had some really fine performances when the car was hopeless as well, but he's just been banging it in since Austin, just making the most of that vastly improved Alpine. So although I said Haas were, on balance, the 6th best team, I think a tip of the hat to Alpine for the recovery they've made, because they had to make such an improbable recovery, because Interlagos wasn't a fluke as well. They did have to earn that position also. So, well done to them. I just want to interrupt this podcast for a bit of light breaking news, seeing as it cropped up briefly, I think, earlier on about Max Verstappen's community service. So it's actually been announced now. Remember that it was actually work of public interest, which was a very FIA way of saying it. So we know that Verstappen, slightly I think to his chagrin, needs to go to the FIA Awards Gala for winning the championship, which this year's in Rwanda. So while he's there, it's in Kigali, he'll undertake some work with junior competitors as part of the grassroots development program by the Rwanda Automobile Club. The activity is going to involve an FIA affordable cross car, which was built locally in Rwanda by the RSC from blueprints provided by the FIA, blah, 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 blah. That sounds about as low effort for Verstappen as it'll be. And I suspect if there is any, and it's not going to involve this, but if he had any chance of driving a cross car in Rwanda, he'd probably do it. So that's probably about as fun as it gets for him. Yeah, I watched a TV show about Rwanda, actually, and it looks like a great place. I'd actually really like to go. They do an alcohol made out of bananas, so Max Verstappen can celebrate there. So it'll be great. I think he's going to really enjoy it. You know that the sponsor of this episode is the Dutch Grand Prix, not the yet-to-be-confirmed Rwanda Grand Prix. Oh, no, I've put myself in hot water. You're definitely trying to get visit Rwanda, if that's what their tourist board's called, I think so. Yes. To fly you out there, yes. I'd love to go. That's a shameless attempt there to...
You and your banana beer.
Banana beer doesn't sponsor this podcast, but it can if it wants. Exactly. So, that's a good little bit of updated breaking news there from you, Scott. Thanks for that. So, interesting little battle in the mid-pack. We've covered that well. Fernando Alonso signed off with a couple of points as well. That was a good weekend for him, but Aston Martin not been a happy second half of the season. Right, Scott, have we got time for one last time? Yes, there is no choice. We briefly thought we wouldn't, but
we must.
Welcome to Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner.
Well, Scott, we were asked to visit Sympathy Corner by Gavin Cameron and Jack Lunn, although Gavin did actually suggest a Sympathy Corner for Valtteri Bottas's victims. So where does your sympathy lie?
Just in general with Valtteri at the moment, he's about as relaxed as an F1 driver gets, and he's past caring now, isn't he? He said after the race he's admitted that the move to Sauber was a mistake, which is quite a punchy thing for him to say. It's all gone wrong. Plans in the bin since Fred Vasseur left, and I didn't actually know that Valtteri had an option to leave in his contract if Fred left. But by that point, it was quite late in the day, or late in the year, literally. And the Audi project was obviously in the works, and he thought he was going to be able to front the Audi project, so better to stick around. It's just been a sequence of problems since then. In terms of the details of this race alone was reason to visit Sympathy Corner on multiple occasions, because he did such a good job in qualifying, and after Zhou Guanyu's great points finish in Qatar, it looked like it might be Bottas's turn this weekend, and just very quickly started to go downhill. He found himself being a little bit Bottased on the first lap, where he just couldn't quite make it work in battle. Kevin Magnussen was miles more decisive going into that braking zone, and then I do think he was genuinely unlucky with the way that that pack jostled. Perez checked up a little bit and cut back across, and Valtteri was clambering over the curb to avoid him. A 10-second penalty for that felt really harsh.
I think that that the whole confusion among those 4 cars on the first lap up at that chicane was actually triggered by a problem in Perez's gearbox. He said that there was, like, he didn't get proper drive as he changed gear, and I think that caused all that bunching, and everybody was sort of scurrying to get around him as they arrived into that braking zone, because he'd lost momentum. So even though he retired shortly after being hit, I think he was about to retire anyway with a mechanical.
So it's peak Sympathy Corner for Bottas to potentially have got a penalty for causing a collision that he didn't actually cause in real terms, if that car's like slower than it should have been. No qualms at all for torpedoing Magnussen's hat later in the race. That was like it was obviously much more extreme. The only time I think we've ever really seen that is obviously the start in Hungary in 21 from Valtteri. But because his F1 career is pretty much summarised by being lightning fast on Saturday and just not being a great wheel-to-wheel racer on Sunday, in a way it was like a ill-fitting way for his F1 career to end, that the race included just a completely haphazard bit of wheel-to-wheel battling.
But he's determined for this not to be the end. He said that a few times this weekend. He said, I've been thinking about it, and I've decided this is not the end.
He doesn't get to decide.
Well, he doesn't, but...
That sounds very Checo.
We're expecting him to be a Mercedes reserve next year. I don't think there's a way back in at Mercedes unless they need someone for a weekend, but he basically sees it that he's got a year to hang around, try and get back in for 26. And I think, given he's had a pretty good season, he's got a chance. The influx of new talent doesn't help that, but you could have a team, and there's an 11th team going to be around as well. So I think Bottas he's got hope, because if you need an experienced driver who can still do it, who's still got something to prove, he's a pretty good choice.
Just a quick one, and I'm conscious of time, but Bottas said he had an option for Williams. Do you think it would have ended pretty similarly had he stayed at Williams for these few years? Because I actually do. I think
to go there instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would have... Well, I think it would have gone better, because Sauber's just been a bit of a mess.
Yeah, it depends how much...
The Williams trajectory is at least... It's going broadly, not in championship results, obviously, because it's stepped back this year, but you can sort of see the bigger picture there and the flashes of promise. Like, Williams has had a really wasteful final third of the season. It should have been much better than this. I guess the what if there is, where does the Bottas move to Williams fit in around sort of Alex Albon's situation? Who beats who? Do they actually work really well together? It would actually be quite fun as a driver lineup, I think, Albon and Bottas. But unfortunately, as I said earlier, because it was you who heard from him after the race, Samarth, Bottas just admits now made the wrong choice.
Yeah, really refreshing honesty there, actually. Like, I was taken aback by that. I thought it was really interesting to hear about that. We wrote about it on the-race.com.
Yes, don't forget the hyphen if you're going there. But I think ultimately, if this is the end for Valtteri Bottas as an F1 race driver, he's had 12 seasons. So, as you say, if he'd gone to Williams, his time may have been up anyway. But he's still keen to entice us back to sympathy corner again in the future. And maybe this will not be the last time we go there. For the 24th and final time of the season, we'll be tackling listener questions in the final part of the podcast. Doesn't mean this will be the last time we'll answer any this year, because as always, we've got plenty more emerging from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, but it's the last time in a race review. Remember, if you're interested in the Race Members Club, click the link in the episode description or search for the race on Patreon for more information on how to sign up and also the many benefits, including question asking privileges and exclusive members podcasts. Right, Scott. Ethan Fish asks, why is Lewis Hamilton getting a send-off like he's leaving the sport? He's just changing teams. It feels unnecessary and very main character syndrome.
I think ultimately it's a unique partnership. Was it 12 seasons in total with Mercedes? Nearly 250 race starts. I think 84 wins, 6 drivers' titles, 8 constructors' titles together. They rewrote F1 history. It's the most successful driver-team partnership ever. So yeah, he's not leaving F1, barring, well, we predicted stability in the driver market, didn't we, about 10, 11 months ago when we predicted the 2025 driver lineup. So who am I to sit here and say with 100% certainty Lewis Hamilton won't shock us all over the winter and not come back? But he's going to Ferrari, he's going to another team. I understand that cynicism and sort of feeling of this is a little bit overblown. But it's ultimately a celebration of something nobody thought would be possible. Great set of achievements. It is coming to an end. So, yeah, quite nice. And they deliberately didn't do anything in advance because they wanted to focus on actually executing, which I think is why they then did the moment on the grid after the race and that sort of thing. I think if Mercedes had wanted to do its own little stuff in advance, guard of honour, like Sauber did for Joe and Bottas, maybe there'd have been a little bit sort of F1 or whatever led fanfare afterwards.
Yeah, that guard of honour for Joe and Bottas, much as I like the two of them, and they've had 3 good years there, I thought was a little bit over the top for that sort of thing. But, they can say farewell however they want. Mark, a question from Simon Ems. Was that Lando Norris' best drive in F1? He seemed utterly and boringly dominant today and totally in control. This bodes well for next year.
I mean, he couldn't have done anything better, could he? He set pole by a handy margin and led from start to finish. But yeah, his drive at Singapore or his drive at Zandvoort, they were terrific as well. His best, I'd say it was. It didn't have enough challenges in to be his best. He did the job. He turned up with the fastest car, put it on pole by a handy amount. Did the job in the race. Perfect.
Samarth, a question from Michael Morwood. What's the most significant development from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix?
Well, Scott and Mark have developed coughs, so I'd say that's the most significant development. Apart from that, Sauber have extended the rear part of their floor. Are we talking technical developments here?
I assume so, yeah.
Right, well, Sauber have developed their floor again, the rear part, for better efficiency at low ride heights, which is where these cars generate the most downforce. And they've kind of made the diffuser more efficient by kind of repositioning bits of the rear brake ducts. Sauber have been developing late in the season. Alpine also have a new nose for which they needed new crash tests to get that. So it's pretty significant and completely reshaped front wing. Different elements everywhere. So yeah, it's exciting at the end of the season to see people still bringing stuff to their cars. I was afraid there'd be nothing there.
Question from Matt Bailey that I'll take. When did Ferrari find out about Leclerc's battery problem? If it was before FP1, what stops them from changing it before? Logistics, FIA rules on limited parts, something else? Well, they knew that they were having problems with the energy store. I asked Fred Vasseur about it, and he said that basically they knew they were losing performance from it, but before FP1, they were still looking at it. They were still trying to charge it up and getting it charged and discharged at maximum efficiency because they didn't want to take the penalty if they could. And that wasn't something they suddenly discovered. They knew there was a problem there. And then eventually they just thought, no, this isn't going to work. We've got to switch. And it was the right decision, wasn't it? Because Leclerc came through. So it was just one of those things. and they could change it whenever they want, but it was the third energy store, third battery, so that was the 10th place grid penalty. Right, Scott, a question from Kyle Tyler Biggs. 2024 has been at times bruising for Lando Norris, but he has had blistering, unbeatable performances, including Abu Dhabi. Did Norris's performance today with a lights to flag victory show his ongoing process of maturing and blooding in, a process necessary for him to become world champion?
I think it's definitely all part of the development. What I liked about this win, and maybe this links a little bit into the question that Mark had about the sort of is it his best, is Singapore was crushing in terms of that win margin, but you remember they had those 2 near misses, unforced errors in that Grand Prix that could have cost it. This isn't the kind of challenge that Singapore is in that respect for a driver, but it was so controlled and assured, and the fact that he had those, was it 2 temps on Piastri in qualifying? So it was just a great flourish at the end of the year to take a car that was clearly had an edge on a track where I think in Q1 there was a point where 19 drivers had set a time after the first runs, and there was 7 temps between them. That's how close it was. So for Norris to have just ticked every box this weekend and not looked shaky at all, that's a really good sign. I remember when Verstappen won here in 2020, which was obviously a bit weird because Hamilton had rushed back from COVID, maybe wasn't 100%. But there was a little bit, I remember feeling a little bit there of like Verstappen and Red Bull just feel like they're now in a really good place to start properly maximising it. And I wonder if Norris and McLaren are starting to enter that space as well.
Mark, a question from Laura. Why did George Russell struggle so much with overtaking Pierre Gasly at the start while Verstappen and Hamilton passed him easily later on? It seems Russell and the Ferrari struggled so much more with their tyres than Norris and Hamilton.
Well, I think in the first case, they're on equal tyres earlier in the race, whereas later on, there's tyre offsets. So that always gives a good delta to overtake. And yeah, I think George was just generally struggling with the balance of the car. So, if you're struggling with the balance of the car, you're not as quick through the corners, you're not as quick onto the straight. So you're not as quick at the end of them either.
Thomas Knights has a question for you, Samarth. Considering after Miami, Perez was second in the championship on 103 points, just how bad has it been to average 3 points a weekend for the rest of the season? And also, how bad does Red Bull Racing giving him a contract look now? It's cost him at least 1 position in the Constructors' Championship and the prize money with that, and more money to terminate his contract if they do.
Yeah, it's just not good enough. Sergio Perez has had a really poor season. I think wider than that, I think Red Bull have a second driver problem here that they need to fix, particularly for 2025, given cars could converge again, it could be even tighter. Who knows if they'll lose even more points to other teams in the championship. In hindsight, it looks bad giving him a contract like this. Yeah, sure. But I think that's a bit of an unfair one as well. I mean, I think decisions were made at the time, and I don't want to go back and be like, oh, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. But I definitely do agree he's had a really poor season.
Since the summer break, outscored by Pierre Gasly, matched for points by Fernando Alonso, and only scored 2 more points than Nico Hülkenberg.
Well, some damning statistics there. You certainly can't argue with that. Right, a question from George Vandini and Jamie Stark. Why wouldn't Ferrari pit Carlos Sainz once he had the gap to Charles Leclerc? He had a pit stop to Leclerc, and it seemed worth a gamble from the outside looking in. What Ferrari's thinking was they could do that, but keep Sainz close. You never know what Norris is going to do. Could have a spin, in which case you're close and you get ahead. So maximise your race, be as close as you possibly can, because you never know what could happen. I don't think a pit stop would have made any difference. It would have got him fastest lap probably, but it wouldn't have allowed him to close and attack. I don't think the tyres weren't working in that way. Scott, a question from Jake Britton. Are these 10-second penalties becoming excessive? It feels like drivers are getting them for being caught up in incidents and then being slapped with a race-ruining 10-second penalty.
As I said, I think the Bottas one was harsh. I don't think that was necessary. But maybe it was perceived to be at the time, again, because of what I was saying earlier about whether consequences are creeping into the decision-making process. With the Verstappen one, no first-lap leniency for him. Again, was it consequences? Was it that they just felt that he'd launched a move that was never going to come off, whatever? And then Was there a third time penalty in that race? I think there was, but I can't remember.
There was one for Lance Stroll. He got a 5-second penalty for track limits, and that dropped him from 12th to 14th. I can't believe we haven't mentioned it.
Repeatedly leaving the track for no reason was basically the penalty, wasn't it? Look, the problem is, like I said, you've got 10-second penalties that are often prescribed for certain scenarios. That's probably the most problematic element of it. I do think it's unnecessary, and I would just like to see a little bit more discretion applied wherever possible.
Mark, a question from Chris Parrott. Martin Brundle in commentary said Max Verstappen should have factored the Constructors' Championship situation into his calculation when lunging Piastri into turn 1. Is this just old school thinking, or is there a place for that kind of mindset in 2024?
Yeah, I think the point Martin was making was it's a little bit unfair to try for a sort of desperate Dan 50-50 move on someone who's trying to secure a Constructors' Championship. And whether there's a place for that, I think that's just up to the individuals concerned. He was just expressing what his code would be, and I don't think you'd be unique in taking that view.
So, the question from Christopher Partridge. Why have Mercedes been releasing Hamilton so late in quali to do his final laps of each session, as this has been detrimental to him several times this season, allowing to be caught in traffic or at the risk of red or yellow flags and not able to progress to the next session?
That's a really good spot. It could just be an aggressive strategy to kind of get him the best track conditions at the end of a session. And particularly as he's low on confidence with the car, I think maybe it's a ploy to help him with that. At the same time, it can backfire massively when you're stuck in traffic. So, that's what I think on that.
Question I'll take from Robert Odocic. Did George Russell's comments about Max swearing at stewards maybe stretch the truth a little? I'm sure stewards would reprimand him for that. I'm not sure Russell said Max swore at the stewards, to be honest. He did say he was quite agitated, but there is obviously a version of events from George Russell and there's a version of events from Max Verstappen, and they're not quite identical. I don't know which one's exactly correct. What I do know is George Russell was irritated with Max publicly criticising him after winning in Qatar and felt he had to respond, had the right to respond, wants to draw a line in the sand. And I also know that whatever it was, the main thing was what Verstappen said to Russell once they'd just come out of the stewards, which was the supposed threat. So the one thing I do know is that Mercedes representative did go back to the stewards and say, by the way, Max Verstappen said this, not to try and get that tackled, but just so it was registered in case there was an incident. Obviously, we weren't there, so we can't say exactly what was happening, but I don't think the stewards won't intervene in what people are saying. The stewards can't just in general complain and punish you for just generally lying about something. I don't think George Russell is lying. I don't think Max Verstappen's lying, but any two people's account of an incident will always change a little bit. So, just one of those things. Scott, a question from Mr. Wapojif. With this likely being Sergio Perez's last Red Bull weekend or last F1 weekend, it seems an acrimonious split. Is that true? What are your insights on the team's relationship with the driver? Checo seems a very nice bloke, but he's in denial if he thinks he's going to be with the team next year.
I don't know if it's acrimonious. I think it's more that they are naturally taking opposing views. Perez doesn't want to relinquish his seat, and he has no intention of resigning. I think every public comment Perez has made in advance of Sunday is with the view of, I am going to maintain my position for two reasons. One, I don't want to step down, and two, if I'm going to lose my drive, they're damn well going to have to pay me for stepping aside. We had the first, I think, shift in Perez's public position after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Post-race, he said that he admitted for the first time that there are talks ongoing and that his future will be decided in the coming days. He said very many times that if they can't come to some kind of agreement, he expects to be driving next year because he has a contract, which you can read between those vast lines as, if they don't find a good number for me to accept, I'm back here. See you in testing, guys. I don't think it's acrimonious. My understanding is there were conversations before, during, and there will be after this weekend. Checo seemed to be in pretty good kind of spirits with his team, specifically through in this weekend. It's just obviously after the race and disappointing qualifying is is where he shows frustration or emotion or whatever. I didn't get any impression post-race that there's like a total breakdown in the relationship. It is just, unfortunately, like always happens with these teams, if a team wants to dump the driver and the driver's trying to cling on to their seat, they just won't see eye to eye.
Mark, question from Greg Myers. Have we seen the end of lap 1, turn 1? No further investigations for incidents on track?
Well, it does seem that the new regime is keen to make its presence felt. So perhaps, yeah. I mean, this always down to the discretion of the stewards, and if that's how they want to play, that's how they will play it.
Samarth, question for you from Chris and Gandu. Are Toto Wolff's comments to Russell after the race proof that Mercedes are running with effectively one good chassis and experimental parts on the other car? This is about the comment he made about thanks for running with our setup and parts desires or some such. I didn't hear it directly because I was down in the paddock.
Yeah, I also didn't hear it directly, I got to admit. I got to say, I don't think it's that clear cut. I don't think they're going to be running completely different specs, but there might be some changes there. Mark?
Yeah, it's what it was a reference to was the experimental suspension parts on the front of Russell's car, and which were fitted in practice in order to qualify them to be run in the young driver test after the weekend. You cannot run parts in that. You cannot run development parts. So as long as you've run them in a practice session, at least in a practice session, you're allowed to run them in that test session. So that's all it was, and they didn't want to complicate Hamilton's weekend with that. So George ran the experimental suspension on Friday and reverted to normal for the rest of the weekend. That's all it was. And inevitably it triggers ridiculous conspiracy theories, but there you go.
Is that just a different wholly different suspension, or just the way it's aligned?
No, it's. I believe it's to do with the internals. The internal mechanism works in a slightly different way. It's just a development part for next year. It's a 25 suspension part essentially.
And the final question I'll take from David Tripler. Why was the Russell-Lawson situation in Q1 not a penalty? I always find it a bit weird how lenient the stewards are when it comes to drivers getting in the way of others in quali while going super slow in the last few corners. Yeah, you could certainly make a argument that they were in the way. I think it wasn't given as a penalty because there were just a lot of cars around. There were honest attempts made to keep out of the way. Yeah, there was some impeding, but there's an element to which there are 20 cars on track and they can't completely vanish. So I think it was just shrugged off because it was like a good attempt was made in order to do that. Particularly Q1 is an absolute mess because of the way the tyres are, and this will just keep happening no matter what you do. You're going to have these queues and these problems, unfortunately, and that'll be taken into account when the stewards decide whether or not to take action. Well, thanks very much to everyone for your questions. Thanks to Mark, Samarth and Scott for your insights. The F1 season may be over, but we're going to still be here. I'm going to be staying out for the test, in fact, on Tuesday, so looking forward to that. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.